Hello, I am Peter Okocha. Welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. Nearly 250 million people in Africa will catch coronavirus in the first year of the pandemic. That's the stark warning from the World Health Organization. We examine their claim. Coronavirus concerns in South Sudan as the country reports its first death and the virus reaches a crowded camp for displaced people. What now for democracy? We'll look at the impact coronavirus restrictions could have on upcoming elections across Africa. Ethiopia has postponed its August elections due to COVID-19, but the opposition claims this will work to the advantage of the ruling party.
They will be using the state of emergency, the pandemic, to crack down on opposition, to shut down the political space.
Also on the program, Fußball kommen nach Haus. And in case you don't understand German, that means football's coming home. The Bundesliga is back, but what will it be like playing behind closed doors? Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Nearly 250 million people in Africa could catch coronavirus in the first year of the pandemic. That's according to a new study by scientists at the World Health Organization. The virus has been relatively slow to spread in Africa compared to other parts of the world, but the research predicts that 250 million strong population in the African region could be infected over a 12-month period. Of those, some 5.5 million would require hospital treatment, putting a huge strain on services across the continent. However, the study also predicts a maximum death toll of just 190,000. Now, that would be a lower rate of deaths to infections than we've seen in the US and across Europe, which could be due to younger populations and lower rates of obesity. So how can we read these figures? We're now joined by Dr. Ahmed Kalebi. He's the Chief Executive Officer of the Lancet Group of Laboratories in East Africa in Nairobi. Doctor, thanks for joining us. What do you make of this prediction?
I think the predictions are not surprising because for the last 6 weeks or so of the outbreak in Africa, particularly in East Africa, we have not seen the kind of numbers that we have seen in Europe and Asia. So for most of us, we are not surprised. We are actually relieved, and we hope it stays that way. But what is new from this study is the prediction of what will go forward, because we have been waiting maybe for an upsurge or to flatten the curve. But it seems like from the study and their modeling, this outbreak or this virus will be here to stay for a long time, maybe even 2 years. And the problem therefore becomes that if it's going to stay for another 2 years and it spreads in the community, we are at risk of a surge. And even if the numbers will not be as high as what you have seen in the UK or the US, but with the capacity that we have, you might actually have more deaths per capita.
And therein lies the next point I want to make, because the reaction to this analysis on social media today has been one of accusing the WHO of being alarmist. I mean, these figures or such figures have been predicted across the continent since the start of this pandemic. Why hasn't this happened just yet?
Actually, the figures that came out today, they are basically saying better than what was said, let's say, 6 weeks ago. The figures are saying that we won't have as high a number as what was expected. But it's also saying that we're not out of the woods yet. We have not completely dodged the bullet. We can still have deaths happening. We will still have a high rate of infection. But if you consider what you compare with other countries, I think even the WHO figures are kind of dampening it down. It's not that bad.
And is it possible for countries across the continent to mitigate against these figures, to make sure that they don't hit these figures that the WHO is predicting? And if so, what can they do?
Firstly, is that we have done pretty well in most African countries because we are behind the curve for most of the European countries, which means we could learn from the lessons that was going on elsewhere and we could take steps. So if you look at countries like Uganda, they put a lockdown much earlier. If you look at South Africa, and I think that has had a big impact. That's why we are talking what we are talking right now. Otherwise, we'll be talking like Iran, mass graves and a lot of deaths. So we've actually kind of survived this. And The key thing now is how do we make sure we maintain those gains and we mitigate going forward. And that is actually what needs to be done. But it has to be a balance now, yeah. Because life has to continue.
Let me just put this next point to you. It's a statement, first of all, from the Nigerian health minister, where he says that the pregnancy and immunization services have fallen by half since the beginning of this coronavirus pandemic. How is the focus, the general focus on the coronavirus pandemic, affecting treatment of other important or other serious illnesses like cancer, HIV, AIDS, tuberculosis?
Very badly. It's affecting it very badly. I can say that most health services have ground to a halt. If you look at things like hospitalization, number of beds occupied, in other words, the bed occupancy, the number of admissions in hospitals, the number of visits to hospital. In my lab, for example, the number of people who are coming, they are fallen by more than 70%. So if it means that a lot of these people who are not coming for their tests, who are not coming for their checkups, who are not getting admitted, they are actually suffering at home. And we might actually see not as many deaths with corona, but more deaths because of the poor outcome from the other conditions. And maternal health is one of the big to be hit. The ones to be hardest hit is maternal health and immunization programs because they're just not happening at the moment. So it's a big scare.
Dr. Ahmed Kalebi, thank you very much for your insight into this very important story. Thank you very much. Well, the coronavirus pandemic has forced Ethiopia to postpone August's landmark parliamentary polls. The elections would have been the first under Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who has initiated sweeping reform measures. Ethiopia has seen a surge in ethnic and religious violence since Mr. Ahmed came to power, and the postponement has led to uncertainty and concern among the opposition. Kalkidan Yibeltal reports.
This was the moment Ethiopia's parliament approved postponing August's parliamentary elections. There is already a state of emergency declared amid the coronavirus pandemic, putting significant restrictions on political rallies. For many Ethiopians, the elections would have been the highest point of a political transition that began in 2018 when Abiy Ahmed became prime minister. Now some opposition groups believe the delay could signal an attempt at a power grab.
Possibility of transition to democracy is very slim. They are going to use the parliament and the House of Federation, where they have absolute majority, to pass decisions that will extend their term. And while doing this, using the legal instruments to extend their term, they will be using the state of emergency, the pandemic, to crack down on opposition, to shut down the political space, and also to criminalize political activities.
Even before the COVID-19 crisis, there were accusations of creeping repression. Rights groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch reported the arrests of journalists and the opposition.
Fairly sort of prevalent complaints of harassment from a number of different locations. And again, that was from a fairly diverse cast of opposition actors, not just from one party or one region. And these were allegations of arrests, measures being taken to prevent offices being opened or from rallies being held, these kind of intimidation tactics, which did suggest that the opposition had some legitimate complaints that not all was being done to sort of prepare the ground for a free and fair election.
The COVID-19 crisis has intensified Ethiopia's political contestations. Some opposition groups are saying that the government can't legitimately stay in power after September, when its term expires. The TPLF, a former member party of the ruling coalition, which was then forced out by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, is threatening to conduct an election in the region that it governs. The Prime Minister has recently held discussions with some opposition leaders and reiterated his promise for a free, fair and democratic election after the crisis.
There are accusations that because of the state of emergency, the government is suppressing and violating human rights. I would say it's quite the opposite. People are moving about, hug each other as if there is no state of emergency or a pandemic. The issue is not using the decree to suppress dissent. What we are lacking is the inability to enforce it well.
But the fact that the election will not be held on time means a constitutional crisis is looming. Even with a relatively small and growing number of confirmed cases, the coronavirus pandemic seems to already have impacted Ethiopian politics in a significant way. Kalkidan Ibeltal, BBC News, Addis Ababa.
So let's delve a bit deeper into the effects coronavirus might have on democracies. Boniface Dulani is a senior lecturer on African politics at the University of Malawi. He's also Afrobarometer's director of surveys. He joins me now from Zomba in Malawi. Boniface, it can be argued that African countries have made great strides in democracy over the last 2 decades. But could new coronavirus derail this progress?
Yeah, actually, the example of Ethiopia that we've just been discussing is one of several examples on the African continent where leaders have taken advantage of COVID-19 to restrict the political space, including democratic space, in the name of health protection.
Now, different countries seem to be taking different routes. Ethiopia, as we said, have postponed their elections. In Uganda, President Museveni has warned that elections in July next year might not hold. But Burundi is going ahead with elections next week. What can we read into these different methods?
Well, you're right that, Uganda has threatened to postpone elections for 5 years, but Burundi, like Malawi, actually are going ahead with their elections. Now, but that doesn't mean that the governments in these two countries have not attempted to restrict the political space. So in Burundi, the government there has tried to restrict the space for campaign, especially opportunities for the opposition in the name of COVID-19. In Malawi, the government has tried again to stop the elections, only that the courts have stepped in to call upon, I think, government to live up to the constitutional requirement to hold elections. In Tanzania, we've also seen, I think, the ruling party there, Chama cha Mapinduzi, again, trying to, restrict the political space, especially for the opposition in the name of COVID-19. So we will see, I think, as this unfolds, that,
Oh, we seem to have lost Boniface, the lecturer, Boniface Dulani from the University of Malawi. Let's go to South Sudan now, which has confirmed its first death from COVID-19. It was one of the last countries in Africa to report a case of coronavirus, but numbers there are rising and now stand at 231. It was just 90 a week ago. Worryingly, 2 cases were confirmed at a camp for displaced people in Juba. Despite this, the government has been easing lockdown measures. The BBC's Catherine Biaruhanga reports.
People here have spent years sheltering from South Sudan's civil war. Now coronavirus has arrived at this camp of 30,000 on the outskirts of Juba. 2 South Sudanese in their 20s tested positive for COVID-19 here. With families squeezed into small makeshift structures, many are worried the virus will spread quickly.
We are very close to each other. For example, in our rooms, you find 10 people in the same room, or you find 3 people in the same mosquito net. From there, how can we put the rule that says that make 1 distance?
There are 190,000 people in UN camps like this one across South Sudan. Even if they wanted to leave, it's difficult. The areas are fenced off and movements in and out are severely restricted. There have also been reports of renewed fighting in parts of the country. From the start, aid agencies worried about COVID-19 reaching displacement and refugee camps. There are only basic health and sanitation facilities available.
There is need for soaps, both liquid soap and hard soap, to be distributed to the communities in need, so that we keep it as a mean for COVID-19 protective measures. This is one of the challenges, the most challenging.
The number of confirmed cases in South Sudan continues to grow. Initially, it was mainly foreign travellers who tested positive, but now most cases are from community transmissions. Under pressure because of economic concerns, the country's leaders decided to ease lockdown measures last week. Shops, bars, restaurants and markets have been reopened, and domestic and regional flights are allowed to operate. There's the potential for a spike in the disease, especially in the capital.
It's not just the camp, but we've also got prisons, we've got hospitals, and many parts of Juba are quite low income but high density. So you've got the same kinds of problems with lots of people living in quite a confined area, and it is very difficult for them to fulfill all of those measures.
It would be hard for South Sudan to cope with a serious outbreak. Already one of the world's poorest nations, its healthcare system has been battered by 6 years of civil war. This week, a government official said only 18 COVID-19 patients were actually being managed in an isolation centre. The rest remained at home. Catherine Biarhanga, BBC News.
This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okwoche. Still to come, Mimi's with us for sports, and it's been a long time coming for football fans, but the beautiful game returns to Germany this weekend. I'm Peter Okwoche. Welcome back to Focus on Africa. It's now time for some sports, and joining me from a safe social and physical distance, it's Mimi.
Indeed, Peter, thank you very much. Now, football is back, at least in Germany. Now, the Bundesliga is kicking off again this weekend after suspending it during the coronavirus pandemic. But it's going to have a very different feel and look to it. That's because there will be no fans allowed to attend. They'll be playing behind closed doors. Now, I've been speaking to Taiwo Awoniyi, the 22-year-old Liverpool loanee who's playing at FC Mainz. They're playing their game this Sunday, and he's been speaking how different it's going to be without the fans.
For me, I would have to say, it's not like he feel weird playing without the fans, but we as a player will feel really. I feel really bad for them because as much as we love playing football, they love also supporting their clubs, cheering their clubs, because most games sometimes are won with the fans, but the most important thing now is the health of the whole world, the safety of the whole world, and I think this is why the DFA and the German government have decided to play without the fans. For me, it's just like a caution to prevent the pandemic really happening again. As we all know, that football is a game of the world. Everyone wants to come to the stadium to watch, but we just have to feel really bad for them as the fans, and we hope they keep on supporting, watching from home. I think we are all looking forward to the game in the weekend. But as you all know, football is a game of contact.
All right, so that's Taiwo Awoniyi speaking to me over there in Germany. But here in the UK, the government has been meeting with the Premier League all week discussing about a return for the Premier League. They've given it a green light to go ahead and start in June, but it's not so simple. The players have had concerns as well as managers about restarting the league June the 12th. Now, joining me live now to discuss that and a lot more is Darren Lewis, Daily Mirror columnist and football writer. Darren, thank you so much for joining us here on Focus on Africa. Is this a financial decision if the Premier League were to go ahead and restart this season?
Absolutely, Mimi. There's only one reason why it would go ahead. We've seen so many other leagues actually curtailed. We've seen the plans announced by the EFL earlier today for the Leagues 1 and 2 to be curtailed as well. They'll continue talking and ratify that potentially next week. But the reason why the Premier League and the Championship will go to the wire is because of money. Now, we all know, Mimi, that the 20-member clubs, they've held talks already. They know that holding games in empty stadia would result in them losing much-needed ticketing revenue. But it would ensure the payment of the remainder of this season's broadcasting contracts, and they are worth around about £762 million. Also, the pay TV companies, they do not want a continuation of what they've seen so far, which is fans and viewers cancelling their subscriptions because they do not have any live sport. So they are desperate to get it back on. They're desperate to get football on their screens. And they're desperate not to have the 45 non-televised games of the remaining 92 in the Premier League broadcast on terrestrial TV. They want those games on their pay TV screens.
Absolutely. And Darren, as I mentioned, there's been concerns from football players. We've seen Sergio Aguero of Manchester City having reservations. Troy Deeney, the captain of Watford, coming out today as well and saying he's not comfortable playing. Do you see them really kicking off June the 12th?
No, I don't. I don't see them kicking off until at least a week later, partly because of those concerns and partly because of a meeting that the managers held earlier this week when they said, look, they've had 8 weeks out, 7 weeks out in some cases, and it just would not be possible to get them ready to play again in 3.5 weeks' time. But I have to agree with you about the point you made relating to Troy Deeney. He's one of a number of players who says, even though the Premier League have pitched their plans to make stadia biosecure for footballers, we've seen the numbers piling up. We've seen today that the R number has gone up. Footballers have very real concerns, not so much for themselves, but for their families as well. They're concerned that they could get the virus and cope with it, but maybe other more vulnerable people in their families might not. It's a big concern, and I think this will continue, Mimi. I think this will come to a head.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Darren, as always, for all your insight. You've covered football for many years. Thank you so much. Peter, it's back to you in the studio.
Many thanks, Mimi. Good to see you again. Now, just before we leave, let's take another look at your lives under lockdown. We love hearing about how you're getting on. People are coping, optimistic, but also missing elements of normal life. Let's take a look.
I could not go to school. I could not study because of the coronavirus. But thank you for my school, Bedia. We are doing online lesson. I could not do my birthday. I could not invite my friends because of the coronavirus.
So in the morning, it's just business as usual. I wake up. After saying my prayers, I go do some road work with my mom. When we come back, we freshen up. And after that, I do some schoolwork, which I received online from my school. And when I'm done with that, I watch some TV, cartoons, classic football matches. I can't wait to see them again. And I also tend to some of my amazing creations, but I won't tell you.
You wanted to know how I spent my partial shutdown? I decided to paint the houses because that way I don't get bored, and in the shutdown from the 26th of March of 2020, at least I've made a difference on the property.
Oh, amazing. She's painted her house. Brilliant stuff. Now, just another look at some of our top stories here this evening on Focus on Africa. Scientists are warning nearly 250 million people in Africa could be infected with coronavirus in the first year of the pandemic, with 190,000 deaths. But the World Health Organization thinks more people will survive it than in the US and Europe, simply because many Africans are young. As it stands, at the end of this week, there are 75,750 confirmed cases on the continent, and 2,566 people are known to have died from the disease. You can join me on social media. We can continue with some of these conversations. I'm at Okwoche, but for now, that's it from Focus on Africa. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.